Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is the Mending Minds podcast produced by the HAERT program. HAERT takes a preventative skills-based approach to support teen mental wellness. My name is Sonia, and I'm here with Ruhi and Nicole. We are high school students from Monte Vista, and we're here with Barbara, the co-founder of HAERT.
Hi, everyone. I'm an occupational therapist specializing in mental health. I've been working with teens and young adults for the past 5 to 6 years, and I've started the HAERT program to focus on a preventative solution to our mental health crisis instead of waiting until people are struggling or they're in hospital.
HAERT stands for Happiness, Self-Awareness, and Emotional Resilience Training. The HAERT program teaches the skills and strategies that prepare us for life after high school or college.
What are the top 3 things you'll get out of listening to this podcast? 1, how to recognize burnout. 2, learn what to do with burnout and tips to help distress. And 3, learn lifelong strategies to help manage burnout and overworking. We all decided to do this podcast because of a lot of our personal stories and relations. I know personally for me, I went to this podcast because I know someone who just continually ended up overworked and stressed and burnt out. They always had a difficulty prioritizing their tasks and large workload, which made them feel like they had to consistently work and they felt like they could never take a break. And it was really hard for me to watch because I saw how it affected them and emotionally and mentally. And yeah, that's why I went to this podcast.
For me, why I joined this podcast is when I witnessed one of my friends. She had come to school one day and she was in her chem class. And then I remember after our break, she was telling me how tired she was and she felt like she was going to faint and she was so hungry. And like I told her to go home, but she still continued to go on to her next class. And then I guess within that class period, she decided to go home. And then like after school, when I went on to check up on her, she was full of sleep. Like she was so burnt out from the lack of sleep that she has from the lack of eating. She procrastinated on her homework a lot, which also led to lack of sleep. But she went through this, so it was so severe, and like it didn't really make me realize how bad of a situation she was in, and I felt like I wasn't really observant of that. So I joined this podcast because I wanted to help others be able to recognize those signs and be a helping hand whenever they or their friends or family is going through struggles.
Nice.
For me, I joined this podcast because somebody I know that graduated high school, they got so burnt out in high school that they barely enjoyed college. Like they took all these like APs and honors courses specifically like to get into a good college and to like enjoy their college experience. And then it ended up like not even being enjoyable because they got so burnt out in high school and they just didn't have the skills to cope with that stress in college. And I guess like I kind of had a similar mindset as them, like doing the same thing, like burning myself out in high school just to get into a good college. And then like as I watched them struggle, I realized that that's not a healthy way to live. And I want to like do this podcast to like kind of spread that message.
Hearing these stories made us realize that the first thing we need to do is focus on recognizing the signs of burnout so we can actually do something towards it.
So I think one of the first indicators for burnout is like the behaviors and actions of people. So maybe the first is like procrastination. I know, like at least for me, a lot of the times I just try to avoid thinking about like the large amount of tasks that I have to do. And so I just procrastinate it and keep on like delaying what I have to do for later and later. And even when I do that, the weight of what I have to do is still there. It's just being delayed.
Yeah, that's the thing about procrastination, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I relate to that so much. I always procrastinate when I'm burnt out, like scrolling through Instagram, and I just keep saying like 5 more minutes, and then it just never ends. I think another sign of burnout is also just exhaustion, like feeling so tired all the time, but like constantly having to do stuff so you can't even like rest. I think like people who are burnt out, like, or what leads to burnout is just like never taking breaks, and like never sleeping enough. So that just like leads to constantly being tired. Like my friends, whenever I see them burnt out, they're always like trying to fall asleep during lunch to like catch up on the sleep that they missed. It's like really sad to see them like so drowsy all the time.
Yeah, in the middle of the day.
Yeah. And I think another sign of burnout is the feelings that people experience. So sometimes it can be like unmotivation, especially like when you have so much work to do. and you have to do all of it, but you just don't know where to start. It leads to a lot of unmotivated feelings, and even feelings of being overwhelmed because you don't know where to start because everything there's so much that you have to do and everything seems of equal importance and urgency, and it kind of turns into feelings of like helplessness and hopelessness.
I see like people kind of respond to it in different ways. Like for me, when I'm burnt out, I'm usually like very low energy and like I'm just like sad and I cry. But I have this friend that like kind of gets really angry when she's tired and like she takes it out on everyone. So I guess people like respond in different ways just depending on like their personality. But I think in general, people just have like very negative feelings about the work that they need to do and like kind of feel like we don't have control over what has to be done. And I typically always like doubt myself and I feel like I'm failing for not doing anything and like not wanting to do anything. And it's like a really sucky way to feel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think sometimes it can even like turn into feeling like numb about things because it's just so much work that it's easier to not like address it or feel it. And because there's just like so much of a lack of control and yeah.
Do you see in the school, the people around you, people that seem to have that kind of level of numbness or disengagement, right? They seem kind of flat, like they're not experiencing upbeat emotions or really negative emotions. They're just kind of bleh, right there, right?
Mm-hmm.
That numbness, have you seen that?
Yeah, a lot. Like even within my family and even like personal experience, like it's really easy to get into that sort of feeling and it's really hard to get out of it.
Yeah, it is. It's numbness, I think, starts out, not to get too far into the weeds here, but it starts out as a coping strategy, right? You kind of detach yourself so that you don't feel the pain or the discomfort. But then if you do it over and over again, you get to this flat place where you can no longer feel joy or pain, right? Because you take away everything.
And I think that's one of the things.
Desensitize yourself. Sorry. I feel like it's like desensitizing yourself from the environment.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. You're detaching, right? Yeah. So now that we've identified a bunch of the signs of burnout, I think it's really important that we start talking about how to prevent it. But to do that, we have to go kind of upstream of the problem and figure out, well, what is it that's causing burnout? Because it's different for different people, right? There are lots of different factors involved in burnout and overworking. And we all have different habits and different skills and strengths and weaknesses. And so let's try and see if we can identify a lot of the common causes so that we can then start talking about solutions for those different causes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the causes that I've noticed is like normalizing these really intense and crazy work schedules and habits. They're almost sort of praised in a way. Like actually just really recently, I think yesterday in my Spanish class, there was like people trying to like brag about their really intensive and crazy work schedules and how, oh, I only had a couple hours of sleep, or like I barely have any time to work on anything. And that kind of schedule is seen as good or like as if you're being successful. And
yeah, that's right.
I feel like even when I do have like time to just take a break, I feel so like unproductive. I'm like, I should be working right now. Like I should be taking a break. And it's like such a bad mindset to have because it's like so normalized.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes people are not even aware that they're physically exhausted or that they're heading towards exhaustion until they're absolutely wiped out, right? They ignore it, push it away, sweep it under the carpet, stuff it in the closet. I'm not going to pay attention to that. And we talk about how that's a really good thing, just stay focused and just do it and all that. And to some degree it is in various situations, but when you do that constantly, you burn out, right? We can't do that level of high intensity sprint 24/7, right? Life is more like a marathon, so we have to pace ourselves.
Yeah. I think we just like usually just push through it. We just do it because we just kind of avoid the signals of burnout. Because we just like think that our self-worth is tied to the amount of work that we do. Like I know the mindset that I've kind of had for the past 3 years of high school is like burnout is okay because we're doing it for our future. And like when I'm in college, I'll look back at my high school self and like be thankful that I like was burnt out, which is like so stupid to think about. I was like thinking about it yesterday, actually, like have that many positive memories in high school. Like I feel like most of them are just me working. And like when I was hanging out with my friends yesterday, I was like, I want more memories like this, where I'm not just like working and like I'm actually having fun. Because like I don't think I'll look back in college and be like, I'm so proud that I was burnt out in high school. I think I'll be more like, why didn't I have fun in high school? So
Yeah.
I agree. I think another cause is also that we're really afraid to ask for help, especially in this environment. Like asking for help is seen as like you're being inferior in a way, like you're not smart enough to know things and do things by yourself. And so like we're told to like not ask for help in a way. We're told to kind of figure it out on our own. But like I think we need to understand that it's really not a bad thing, and it's part of life, and you're gonna have to ask for help throughout your journey of life. And so like asking teachers for help, or asking, if I can get an extension on something, if like I'm having a really bad mental health day, like you don't have to push yourself to your limits in order to get something done. And like people are generally understanding and kind. Like if you ask for help, most people will try to help you. So I think that's something that we really need to understand.
Yeah, it's that balance between never asking for help and doing it all yourself, and then not being able to do anything for yourself and feeling or acting like everybody else needs to do everything for you, right? There are two very extreme positions, and there's a lot of gray space in between that is very accommodating. And we feel like there's that slippery slope, right? If we go anywhere towards that other side, it's going to be bad. We're going to start some spiral. But that's not true. And I think especially around asking for help, I want to talk about this a little bit, because asking for help doesn't mean throwing your arms up and saying, oh, I can't write that paper, or I can't do the presentation, or turn in that homework assignment, or whatever it is. It's not, I'm abandoning my work, or I need somebody else to pick up the slack and do it for me. It's more like nuanced, right? So we can ask for help in our own, in our school situation, and in our family situation, or wherever it is that we're doing work. And this is a skill that we have to learn as adults. We need to be able to learn how to ask for help. So if you talk to your parents ever about this, or teachers, or other adults around you, how do you ask for help? That's a really interesting question, because it's hard for adults as well, because we have that same sense of, and probably this is where you got it from, right? You're following our role model, which is, I'm afraid to ask for help because I'll be thought of as inferior, right? But asking for help and saying, here's how far I got. I realize I've got a lot on my plate right now. This is a really busy time. Can you help with this particular component? Like, okay, this is a silly example, but right, you've got weekly chores, and you ask your sibling or your parent, hey, this is a really crazy week. Can you take on my weekly chores? And then next week I'll help out by doing yours, in addition to mine, right? So you pick up the slack this week and I'll pick it up next week. Okay, I'll give you a break, right? So we manage our time. That's what it is, time and energy management. And same thing in school. If you have a really busy time, you've got a whole bunch of things assigned. It's actually a skill for work, and not looked down on, and a skill that you need to work on developing, to say to your teachers, hey, I've got these 3 assignments going on right now. Can I get an extension? And this is like not the day of and you haven't got it done. This is like, 2-3 days before, or the week before, or something. And you can see this train coming down, it's like the steamroller, it's coming, and give people warning at that point. And they're very accommodating, right? If you wait to the last minute, then it's harder. And that's a skill that we have to learn how to do, is to manage our time and to notify people around us when we're going to need support or, modification. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So let's talk a little bit about a model for discussing how to address burnout and overworking, a way to think about it. And the reason why I want to do this is because it'll make things, we're going to give like an overwhelming set of information in this podcast, probably because there's so much to talk about, and it's easy to, again, get overwhelmed by overworking and burnout solutions, and I don't want that to happen. So here's a way of thinking about it, to pocket it into compartments that might make it easier to remember. when you think about addressing burnout and overworking, there are 4 things to think about. 4, not 4, 4. 4 things you need to think about: managing your work, managing your body, managing your emotions, and managing your thoughts. Okay? Each of those have different skills, and there are different reasons for working on them, and they affect each of the other ones in a sort of involved way, right? So, when you can't manage your work, and everything seems like it's equally important, then your emotions go in a certain direction, and that makes your thoughts go in a certain direction. Then your body gets worked up and it all spirals out of control, right? Same thing with, if you start off with, oh, I'm dreading junior year, it's going to be horrible. And then your body gets worked up, and then your thoughts go negative, and then your work spirals out of control. So all of those things interact with each other. So again, work, body, emotions, and thoughts. And the purpose of using this model is to talk about how we can solve that problem of burnout and what can we do to focus on. Let's start with managing our work, and then we'll move on to the other ones.
I think one way, like one question that gets brought up is, how do you effectively divide your tasks to prevent being overwhelmed, but still having to do all of the tasks?
For me, I've always used a planner because I like having my work written out in front of me, what I have to do. So I have a checklist that I can cross off and put stars next to the most important stuff. And my friends always make fun of me. They're like, why do you need a planner to remember your homework? And I'm like, I don't. I just like having things to check off, and it just makes me feel like I'm more productive than I am. And I feel like seeing all of it in front of me and being able to organize what I want to do first makes it less overwhelming because I know I can get it done once I plan it out in my planner.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I think I use something similar as well. I like to use Google Calendar, and then I also like to use little post-it notes. I'll write down my task and then stick it on the top of my my desk, and then once I'm done with it, I'll just crumple it and throw in the trash can. It kind of makes me feel gratified and satisfied that I finished this task, and I think that kind of motivates you to keep on going.
Do you guys know any of the brain chemistry behind that? Do you know why writing down your tasks and checking them off, or doing that crumple up and throw it away, why that's healthy or helpful in a neuroscience perspective?
I think I read that it gives you some dopamine when you cross it.
Yeah. Not just when you cross it off, but when you identify it.
Mm-hmm.
Because dopamine is a behavior reward system, right? So we produce dopamine when we decide to do something, and we produce dopamine when we do the thing, and we can look back and say, I did it. And also we get some serotonin for having accomplished, right? That actually helps out too with the whole check off the list. I've accomplished something, and that makes us feel good. And that's in part why organizers and to-do lists are so popular, because they make us feel good. And some people like to take it a little step further and do different color pens for each subject, and different color pens for exams versus papers or presentations or something, everyday homework. And that helps you triage the level of importance of the project. So for example, a 20-minute math homework thing that's worth 5 points, very different from a paper you have to write, or spending 20 minutes on the introduction of the paper, or spending 20 minutes on writing the outline of the paper, right? The math homework seems like it's more critical because it's due tomorrow. And yet it's only 5 points. I mean, in the overall scheme of things, if you turn that one thing in late, it wouldn't be a big deal. But if you turn in your paper late, or don't spend the time to work on the foundation of the paper, the whole paper project becomes, a struggle. And that's a big project, right? So the ability to chop our big tasks, like a paper, down into small tasks. We have a method for this. It's called Agile. And it's a strategy that they use in programming and a lot of other project management, where they chop everything down to even smaller tasks, like 2-hour tasks, 1-hour tasks. And then knock it off, knock this one off, knock that one off. And if a task is taking longer, then that means it needs to be broken down into more subtasks. And also, if we know that we're not getting that thing done, there's something about that task that we're procrastinating on. And so what is the friction? It helps us increase our self-awareness about where our friction is and what can we do about it. Some tasks we don't like to jump into as easy, right? as to others. Math might be the easy thing to get done before an English paper. So lots of things here. The organizer to just get the overwhelm down on paper so it doesn't feel so huge and big and ominous. And that helps us kind of figure out then what's the most priority, what's the most important, what can we triage and like save for later, or what do we have to do now? What's going to be easy to knock off, what's going to be harder to knock off, how do we break those hard things into stuff that's not as hard, right? You know, how do we make it just a 10-minute exercise in something that we really don't like to do, but we're only going to spend 10 minutes on it, and that way, you know, we don't feel so bad about starting it. Maybe we can not procrastinate because it's only 10 minutes, and then we give ourselves kudos for having done it, and then what's the next thing, right? What do you think about those ideas? Is there anything in there that you could use or add to your repertoire?
Yeah, I think like breaking the task down into like smaller steps or smaller like time frames is better, and it's easier to tackle it, and it seems like less intimidating than before. So like if I have to write an entire essay, it's less intimidating to think, okay, I'll just brainstorm my idea and then I'll take a break, rather than like, okay, I have to write my entire essay and like
right in this sitting, right?
Yeah. And I think another thing I do is like sometimes I kind of write on my to-do list what I've already done, just so I can check it out. And it feels better because it's like, oh, okay, I've already done that. Now I can like continue to do more.
Do you know what that is? There's actually a skill name for that. It's called positive reinforcement and a little bit of cheerleading. So you're giving yourself credit for the stuff that you've done, right? Mm-hmm. By writing down what you've already done, and you're also cheering yourself on, saying, look, you know, I've done some stuff. You get the motivation to keep going, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a lot about work, about managing our time, managing our energy, and those are really important things. That point about managing energy, though, is a good segue into how do we manage our body? What is it that's going on physically with ourselves that we can manage better to help us not burn out?
I think one thing that comes up is how much importance do you give to sleep when you're doing these tasks? Because it's really easy when you have like so much work to put sleep on like the last thing that's important. So how do you prioritize sleep into this?
For me, like I know if I stay up till like 4 a.m. studying for a test, I'm not gonna remember a single thing that I studied the next morning because I'll be like just thinking about sleeping the entire time. I think honestly getting a good night of sleep before a test is like so much more helpful than pulling an all-nighter and then not even remembering what you studied like during that all-nighter. And I know it's like really hard to like think sleep is like something you can catch up on later, but I feel like every time I've thought that, I like never actually catch up on my sleep because I'm like, I've been fine without sleep for this week, then like I should be fine later on without sleep too, which is it's such a bad way to think, but yeah.
I think this is something I struggle with a lot. Oftentimes I won't prioritize my sleep. I'll stay up doing my homework or studying for a test. And like Ruby said, like it really doesn't help because then when you're taking that test, you like forget everything. Like I know like one time I stayed up to like 4 a.m. studying for a chem test, and then I had the chem test and like a couple hours later, and it was just like your mind just kind of goes like blank and it becomes all fuzzy and you're just like, I know this, but it's like not registering in your mind. And it's like it's from that lack of sleep. Like your body needs to rest. And I still struggle with this too. Like I'll come home and I'll like crash for 3 hours and it's really bad.
Yeah. And I think like when you sleep, it's really easy to say like I can just add it later. But I think when you sleep, there are different stages of your sleep, and it's important to get all of them in like for the full like 8 to 10 or recommended hours for you. And that's actually really important for memory. So yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. Let me expand on that a little bit. The early stages of sleep, like our early sleep cycles in the first part of the night, like the first half of the night, is focused more on repairing our body and getting us the energy to physically act the next day, right? We're replenishing our energy, our sleep debt, we're repairing bodily functions and things like that. And then the second half of our sleep is more focused on regenerating and clearing out our brains from the last day's activity. So all of the transactions that happen, all the electrical exchanges that happen that are the process of us thinking have leftover residue, right? And we have to recycle those parts and, in a way, bring them back to the start of the process so that we can be ready to do it the next day, right? And this process of sort of clearing out the garbage or recycling the parts so that we have what we need to do the thinking the next day, when we don't have the time to do that because we cut our sleep short with a short night, that's why our brain seems fuzzy. That's why we're not making fast connections between things. Like, we look at a test question and we go, oh gosh, I remember I've seen that before, but I can't remember what it was. And we're not, the things don't add up anymore. Our connections aren't happening. It's because our brain hasn't had a chance to rejuvenate the things, the components that it needs to make those connections the next day. And that's why a good night's sleep is much better than trying to cram the night before. I say this to you, and I totally went through most of my high school and college career doing cramming and reading for my exams because I didn't know any better. Honestly, that was why. So other questions about how to manage our body. What are some of the things that we've noticed that contribute to burnout?
I think something like I wonder is, if you're like taking breaks or you're working, how do you prevent like not just immediately returning to your work afterwards?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's that really resonates with me because it's really easy for me to just go on my phone and then like be on my phone for hours and hours while I'm taking like a break. Yeah, but I think one thing that helps is like setting specific times to work where you put your phone away or like you shut your phone off and then taking like scheduled breaks that are not on your phone.
I agree. I think it's really easy to take breaks, not as easy to go back to them, do your work. For me, I think like setting a time, I think works, but also it's really easy for me to ignore the set time. So I think I really just have to convince myself that like I need to finish this and I need to do this. I need to prioritize this right now. So I think it's really more of like a mindset thing for me.
Yeah, it is. It's a combination of all of the above, actually. I think that's interesting about the mindset. So with the mindset issue, we just need to push ourselves to do it, that kind of thing, right? Have the just do it wherewithal willpower. It's willpower. Willpower works best when our batteries are fully charged. We have stronger willpower. We know that, right? If we're tired or hungry or angry or lonely or whatever called, our willpower is crappy. Yeah, we're much more short-tempered and irritable and not patient, and not able to push ourselves through things. So making sure that we are supporting our bodies in the way that we need to do in order to have good willpower to push through those kinds of things, that's part of managing our body. And by that, I mean, treating physical illness, making sure you have balanced sleep, balanced eating, balanced exercise, avoiding chemicals that alter our moods. All of those things help us strengthen our willpower. Something else that helps us strengthen our willpower is that breaking down of we talked about breaking down our work into smaller things, and then having that break be a sensory break as opposed to a screening break, like a technology break, right? So we talked about this before. When you can do something that is different from what you're doing now, it gives you a better boost of energy. What do I mean by that? If we're sitting, studying in a quiet space, in a focused room, and then we take a break and we do more of the sitting in that quiet space, but we're on our phones, we're not getting that change of stand up, change your circulation, go outside, change the light that's coming into your eyes, change the smells and the physical sensations that you're experiencing. Do something with your dog, engage instead of being isolated, right? That significant change in our sensory experiences gives our senses more energy to do the things that we need to do and better focus. And very often those kind of changes are easier to come back from than a screen. And I'll tell you why. Because app manufacturers spend millions of dollars figuring out the research to addict us to our phones. And I hate the word addiction, but it's actually true. It's like, what is the app designers know the neuroscience that makes us go, oh, one more. Oh, one more. Oh, just there's another one. Look at what I can do if I get this one. One more. It's only going to take 1 more minute. Okay, and it drags out. And they spend a huge amount of time and effort to try and get you to stay in there, because for them it's money, it's advertisers, it's other things, right? And that's their indicator of success, is how sticky a game can be, or whatever a TikTok can be, right? You look, what's the next one? What's the next one? Always, what's the next one? So we have to think about, what is it that's affecting ourselves when we take a break? Is it one that's going to be in line with our goals? So if our goals are to make it be a short break and to feel rejuvenated afterwards, so I can go back and get my work done, so I can actually have my nice break at the end of it, that's what we have to remember, our values and priorities. And that step of remembering our values and priorities goes a long way to supporting your willpower and your mindset change, right?
Yeah, I think I read something really similar, like within color psychology, and how manufacturers use specific colors on purpose to keep consumers like using their phone. It was really fascinating to read about, but like I heard that there's like a tip to turn off the color on your phone to help make it less addicting.
That's great.
I need to try that one day. I think it works.
Yeah, I need to figure out where that is on my phone. That's really interesting. Turning off the color. I wonder, so I know that we're very visual, right? We get a lot of our information from our visual, and even if what we see doesn't coincide with what we hear, our sight overrides our hearing. Would you believe? So that's been demonstrated in actual research. So those kind of visual cues like light and movement are very strong captivators for us and cause us to stick. The idea that our phones are always giving us some kind of input, like whether it's information or stuff that's happening. And I don't mean information like educational information. I mean, a video about celebrity or another song or another funny thing that happened. That's information for our brain, right? And if we constantly have information coming in, our brain never has a chance to stop and rest and regroup the information that it's put in. So imagine you've got a bathtub and you've got the tap on the bathtub and you just keep the tap on, and eventually the bathtub fills. What happens with the excess water? It just pours over the sides, right? You don't keep it. So this is like us with information from our phones. Like we're constantly taking in information, and after a while, we don't even remember what we saw. Like if you spent an hour on your phone, how much of it do you think you would remember?
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
One time, I remember like I was scrolling on my phone, and then for some reason I wanted to go back and find a video, and I thought, oh, that was only like a couple videos back. But then I ended up scrolling like 20, 25 videos. I was like, oh my God, how did I go through so much content?
They're like so short videos too. Like you feel like you're not even watching that much because it's like 5 seconds, but like you watch so much for like
Yeah.
So if you think about that from the perspective of every bit of information is something your brain has to process, and it takes electrical currents to process that information, how much are you using up in just processing content and not actually thinking about something productive? And then after you've processed all that content, how tired would your brain be?
very tired. I like being on your phone is not a good break. It's just like even more overwhelming. Like it adds onto your stress even more.
I think it's just so appealing because it's like the fastest way you can kind of turn off your brain sometimes. So I feel like it's really easy just to try to go into it and like shut off your brain. But in the long run, or like after an hour, you'll notice it's not actually really helpful.
Yeah. It's like candy, right? We need food, we need nutrients. Candy is pleasurable. So we have to balance how much candy and how much food we get. So we're not saying don't use phones at all, because it's pleasurable, right? It keeps us connected. We get information. It's entertaining. There's value in it. But then, how much of it are we taking in?
And then I think another questions people have is more related to the emotions behind it. So how do you avoid feeling stressed out when you have more long-term tasks and it always feels like there's more work to do with it?
I think it's important to like kind of break it down, like not with like long-term projects, to not do everything last minute and like spend a little bit of time on it so that it feels like you're always like working on it and you're not super behind. Like I try to like spend 20 minutes like every day just working on a project, which I know it can be hard because like I always want to procrastinate it, but then like I always think that like I'm gonna like be so mad at myself in the future if I'm like doing the project the night before it's due and it's like taking so long.
What you guys have described is a an incentive that's kind of a long-term incentive, right? We always very often discount our immediate, in favor of pushing stuff off to the long term. Or sorry, it's the backwards. We discount the long term, right? We say, oh, we have plenty of time, we can do it later. Right now I'm going to do my other thing. I've got plenty of time for that, right? Let's push it off. And then of course we get stuck, right? That's exactly what you're describing. But this ability to kind of chip away at it little by little and not just wait and do it all in one lump takes some kind of way to reduce the friction of doing a little bit right now, right? So that baby step has to be little enough that you're like, yeah, I can do it because it's not a big deal. It gets me forward. It's not going to take a huge chunk out of my time. I can go back to whatever thing I was doing before and I won't feel bad about it because I actually got a little bit done even, right? So that 20 minutes for some people is enough. Sometimes it needs to be 10. Sometimes it's just paging back into memory. What was the assignment, right? What's the assignment again? What's the assignment again? What's the assignment again? And every time you page it back into memory, you think a little bit more about, well, okay, if the assignment was to combine this and that and answer the question, or create something that responds to the prompt, that when you page it back into your memory, your brain works on it in the back of your head without you consciously thinking about it. Like instead of I'm going to sit down and work on my paper right now, right? You're like, I'm going to put the ideas into my head again and walk away and go do something else. But in the back of my head, the ideas are brewing. And so the next time I come back to sit down and do my 10, 20 minutes worth of thing, I might have some idea that pops into my head. I can write it down. And then I do that again, right? Go away, think about it, come back, write something else down. And over time, when you collect it, all those little things build up to, what looks like the paper. And you can just add a few bits more, a little bit more structure. And it allows you to build the thing in really short chunks. Have you guys heard of agile programming?
No.
Neither of you are like related to computer science people or programmers or anything like that, right? Okay. So agile programming basically takes a big, huge project, like a months long project, and breaks it down into little tiny 2-hour chunks. Because you think, okay, my project is due in 6 months, 12 months, something like that. What is a 2-hour chunk? And this is like, okay, breaking down this chunk, break down that chunk, this chunk everywhere until you get to these little short chunks of 2 hours. Now, what we're describing is even more tiny. It's only 20 minutes or 15 minutes chunk. So if you can like narrow down your activity to even a smaller chunk, then the friction behind that chunk becomes smaller and smaller, and it eventually becomes something we can push through.
I think that would definitely like make it a lot less overwhelming in the long run, just doing a little bit every day. I think that's something I need to work on for sure.
Are there other frictions, emotional frictions around doing that little tiny chunk?
I think it's like sometimes, like even doing smaller portions, it can be really difficult to start, especially when you don't really even know where to start. I think that's like one of the things.
Yeah, it is. When you have a big project and you don't know where to start, is there any benefit in having? So sometimes I will take you know those big sticky notes that they use like easels, you know, but they're sticky note at the top, so it's a gigantic Post-it note. I'll stick that up on the wall, and then I'll take little Post-it notes and I'll write down a thought on the Post-it note and stick it up on the wall, right? And every time I come up with a thought or I'm spending time on it, I'll put another thought on the wall, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though I don't know how to think about the thing that I have to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where to start with it. But at least I'm getting this stuff out of my head so I can visually see it on the wall in my sticky notes. You can see I'm keeping 3M in business. Single-handedly purchasing all their sticky notes. But you know, I mean, it doesn't have to be sticky notes. It could be little pieces of paper that you tape up on the wall. The point is that you brain dump without knowing where to start. You just, you know, you have some thoughts attached to this thing and you can just brain dump it. And then as you look at it, you can start saying, oh, well, I need to collect some information here, or I need to build this part, or I need to, you know, read something over here to figure out, like, so it starts to materialize as you do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think it's definitely less intimidating than if you had to actually it feels less intimidating if you can like do it on like a Post-it notes, and like when you get the idea you can kind of go back to it.
Yeah, that is actually one of the beauties of the Post-it note, is that it's such a small piece of paper. you know, it's like not super intimidating. Whereas like a blank sheet or like a blank screen in front of you, that's kind of intimidating, right? But a Post-it note, it's just like a couple words, stick it up, no big deal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Other emotions that come around that sense of overwhelm or procrastinating?
Like just feeling super anxious about everything that you have to do, like feeling like you can't get everything done and it won't be to the best of your abilities. Like I know for me, I'm such a perfectionist, so, like I need everything to be like perfect when I do it. And I remember like I've gotten better, but I remember in freshman year of high school, I would spend so much time on assignments that like literally didn't even matter, like they were worth like 2 or 3 points. And like now I know that it doesn't matter as much, but like for larger projects, I still find myself like spending so much extra time that like I could be using on something else.
What got you past the thing before in freshman year with the 2-point things? Was it just experience that you needed to go through the process and really recognize, oh, this really didn't change my grade, even though I spent all night on it?
Yeah, it was just that experience.
Okay. Will your instructors allow you to turn in some kind of draft and then get feedback on it?
No.
Not at all. Okay. What about, do you have friends or study buddies in a classroom, you know, a particular class, or somebody that you know who, like your friend who's not necessarily in your class, but you know, you'd be comfortable with saying, like if it was what's a typical big project? A writing thing?
Yeah, like an essay for English maybe.
Okay. So somebody who, you know, you could have them look at a draft of your essay and they would give you valuable feedback. Do you guys have somebody like that?
Kind of.
Not sure. Even like, you know, a sibling who's not in high school anymore, or like a cousin, or some other kind of mentor or other friend or somebody. I mean,
I think, well, there are like people at our school that like maybe we could ask, but I think it's kind of difficult asking because like they're also writing their own essay, and so you don't want to like put your essay on top of that and be like, can you also check mine and give me feedback?
right, but I'm not saying here's my entire essay, go read it. I'm saying here's a paragraph and it's a rough draft. What do you think of it? Does it explain my, you know, my first sentence well enough? Is there enough supporting evidence? I mean, that's a certain type of writing, but you get my point. Like a small chunk, right? It's just that little chunk and it takes them 15 minutes. And maybe even you're sitting with them while they do it, so that it's not some onerous thing on their heads that they have to think about. And maybe you share it, like you do theirs and they do yours. The reason why I'm describing this is because this is what can happen at work. And this is something that I do, like in a professional setting. Most of the people that I work with, I'm not competing directly with them. So, there's not like some shortage of something, and, I'm in competition with them. And if they get first place, then I get second place, that kind of thing, right? It's not that kind of environment. So, and it actually behooves them to support me, because the thing that I do, they can use, or it benefits them in some way, right? Or they find some way to have some kind of common ground where things are mutually shared. So the example is maybe I'm thinking about doing a new group activity, and I bounce the ideas off of somebody else. What do you think of this idea for, this, like teaching this skill using this activity? And they might say, oh, well, that's a good idea, but you have to watch out for blah, blah, blah. Or I think that's a great idea, and, add this to it, or something like that, right? Does that sound like something that in the high school setting it could be done, or is it impossible to do because of the way high school is structured, or what's the potential there?
I think it kind of just depends on like the type of assignment and the essay, because sometimes like you might have friends, but they might even be in a different class. So like the writing that they're used to is like different than what the teacher expects. Or like sometimes it's like you both have different ideas of like how you want something to look, and like it might not always work out, but I think in like a lot of situations it does work out, like when you ask for help or you ask them to like peer review something. So I think it kind of just depends.
Okay. So it sounds like there is a possibility of, developing an individual in whatever class you're in who's on the same page, because they're learning the same thing at the same time and doing it the same way, right? Not a different class, it's different teacher doing a different way of writing, whatever. Even though I can see how that could work as well. And then with that person in your class, you can bounce ideas off of and develop your thoughts. And it's, like I said, it's small chunks. So this is something that, like, Bill and I do this. We have a big project, and we'll do like draft a chunk of the outline and then give some feedback, right? Get some feedback from the other person, and then do the same thing a little bit more, like shape it, maybe to add on another component, and then get some feedback. And every step is a little bit of feedback. I understand that you guys typically do your work separate, and sometimes you procrastinate and wait until last minute. So it's not possible to do that kind of work, right? Because it's all been pushed and nobody has time for it. And, you don't have time for it. But my point is that if you can do it in a trickle over the time period that you're allotted, instead of waiting at the end, maybe doing it that way of, the draft and feedback, and, review kind of process is an effective way to not feel so overwhelmed, because that's what I do in a professional setting.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah. The question is whether or not it's implementable, right? Can you actually do it? Is there a motivation to do it? Or is there too much friction?
I don't know. I think like for some people it might be, but I think for others it might be harder for them to even like share something with like their peers, or they might have like their own personal insecurities that like make it harder for them to share. But I know like some people it's like it can work really smoothly with them.
Yeah. Right. So it's about finding somebody that you feel comfortable enough and trust enough to share those kind of unfinished works in progress with, right? And also can mean getting over the discomfort that you experience of sharing something that you feel like is not perfect yet.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, at the end of the day, that is one of the key skills of overcoming perfectionism, is being able to release something to somebody else that's half-baked, that's not completely perfect, right? That's the whole point of perfectionism, is like nobody can see it until it's 100% perfect, right?
Mhm.
So in order to get over that mentality, you have to, in little tiny baby chunks, allow somebody to see something that's half-baked, that's a work in progress, and be comfortable with whatever feedback they give you, even though that whole process is really uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And the more you do it, the more it's like, get back up on the bike, even though you fell down or you bumped into something or whatever happened, is uncomfortable. I'm going to do it a little bit again, a little bit again, a little bit again. And then we develop our muscles to deal with that discomfort, and it becomes not so uncomfortable anymore. It may not be something that you guys can implement in high school. I don't know, but maybe it's something that you can think about, when you get into college.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in like college, maybe like, because in certain like colleges, they have like closer, like smaller classrooms or like more professor connection. I think there's like, I mean, there's still competitiveness, but I feel like in like some high schools, there's like a lot of competitiveness in between students.
I
And
think
it's like, instead of pushing your friends up, it's like you push them down.
stand on them to get up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely see that in the Bay Area, that there is that kind of dog eat dog sense of competition, where students are less inclined to work together and more inclined to compete against each other, because there's only so many seats, and you want to get it, not the other person. It's true, and yet at some point we have to break that cycle. And if we, I guess the challenge is, how do you break that cycle and find one person that you could do that with, right? One person you'd be comfortable not competing against, but competing with. So maybe there's a space, maybe there's a way to start that.
Maybe like with our close friends, not just like a random peer in our class, but like people we've known for a while. It might be a little bit easier to like trust them with that.
Right. And they're more likely to want the best for you. You want the best for them. You share in that exchange and support each other both ways in that equation. So it's not just you leaning on the other person, it's the other person also, let's do this together kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in this section, we're talking a little bit more about the emotions that we experience with overwhelm and burnout. And so how do we what do we use? What can the HAERT curriculum suggest to do when we're feeling emotionally distressed, anxious, overwhelmed, annoyed, and we want to either get past those emotions or find a way to change how we feel about stuff. So do you remember the 5 responses to a solution?
Like the like responses that you get, like flight and fight, or like.
So those were the different stress responses. That's true. But then there was this other list of 5. I mean, there's so many lists, it's hard to remember, but maybe with repetition. The 5 responses to the solution were, to the problem were like, so there's something's happened and maybe you can do something about it now, maybe you can't. What are the different responses that you can have? Stay miserable was the first one. Do you remember it now?
Yeah, it's like ringing a bell now.
Stay miserable, make it worse. That includes avoiding.
Oh yeah, I remember it.
Change how you feel and solve the problem. Sometimes we can't actually solve a problem. Like, it's like something happened yesterday. I said something, I did something. I can't go back and change it. I can move forward and try and work on, recovering from it, as it were, but I can't change the thing that happened anymore.
Mhm.
Am I going to stay miserable about it and be super upset that I did that embarrassing thing? Am I going to like never speak to those people again, run away in shame and horror and, avoid and never speak up again because it was so embarrassing that I'm going to restrict the rest of my life because of it? Is there a way to say, yeah, I screwed up. accept it. It's in the past. They're going to think whatever they think. Maybe there's something I can focus on to solve the problem or change how I feel, but I at least have to accept it before I can go in that direction, right? This is like the key bridge to changing how you feel about it and solving the problem. So with emotions, when there's a situation that happens and you're feeling emotional about it, like overwhelm, is there a way to not just be miserable with the overwhelm, not feel resentful about the work that you have to do, or like hopeless or upset about, I have to do all this work and I can't enjoy my high school year or whatever it is, and say, all right, well, everybody has to do it, or most people have to do it. Most of the people around me are doing it. Let me see how I can handle the distressing feelings that I feel with skills, manage the stress response, Nicole, like you were saying, so that I don't feel so much of a stress response. And then think about the thing in a different light that helps me buy into the positives of it, as opposed to just be focusing on the negatives of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's how, they say, oh, change your thoughts and you'll change your world. It's great, but how do you do it?
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, it was kind of just like experience. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I spent like my last 3 years of high school just staying miserable. Like, I definitely did not accept anything. And then when I started senior year, I just like kind of looked back at that and I was like, wow, I really did not enjoy like what were supposed to be like the prime years of my life. And so I guess just like from that experience, like, and wanting to like actually have some positive memories in high school, I think that's kind of what like pushed me to accept a little bit more. And it's still not perfect because I guess it takes time to like change that mindset because I've had it for so long. Gotten better.
Yeah. No, that's great, because you're aware now of when you're doing it, right? You're aware of, oh, I'm doing that miserable thing again, right? Okay, I could start working on changing how I feel about this thing and not be so miserable about it, because what's the point? Yeah. So that's great. Nicole?
Yeah, no, I was gonna say the same, like, because I always had this thing that I just had to get past senior second semester and then like everything will be easier because like I won't have to like, have like college apps on my thing and everything. But I've kind of started realizing like I can't really just keep pushing like my happiness. And so like actually recently me and my friends started doing something called like fried chicken Friday, and like on Fridays after school we have like a list of food that we want to go to and like eat, and so it's really nice.
That's so cute. I love that.
That's great. So you reward yourself for the week, and it's like something to look forward to and a camaraderie and something to laugh about, an experience that you can remember. And you're like filling your battery or your bucket with positive experiences. This is called engaging in pleasant activities. This is actually a skill for improving your emotional management. It's a long-term skill, right? It doesn't happen overnight. It builds up because what you're doing every time you do a pleasant activity is you're dropping a little serotonin and endorphins into your chemistry, right? Do you remember the brain chemistry thing? I don't know if we covered the unit on brain chemistry that well. Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins, DOSE, right? So those 4 hormones contribute to our sense of well-being. They're major hormones that contribute to our sense of well-being. And serotonin and endorphins come from doing something that we enjoy. And if we're doing it with somebody else, like Nicole's talking about, then we also get oxytocin. So we're getting these 3 chemicals that are like lifting us up in terms of the spiral, spiral down or spiral up. And if we keep, like you keep feeding something, it's like vitamins, right? It's like vitamins for your soul. You keep giving yourself a little bit of vitamin, little bit of vitamin, little bit of vitamin, and it maintains you better over the long term. It might not solve your problem right now. It may not make everything better right now, but on the whole, because you're having all these positive experiences, you feel more robust and happier and more content, and you can manage the stressors better. That's a good plan, Nicole.
Yeah, we just actually, yeah, so we started it last week, but yeah, just yesterday we went and we got some fried chicken. It's fun.
I'll have to find out where you go for the fried chicken.
We're starting to oscillate it So now,
different places.
yeah, but we still call it Fried Chicken Friday.
Cute. Okay. Anybody ever feel resentment about the overwhelm or about the work? Yeah. And if so, or guilt or shame or something like that about the procrastination, how do you handle that?
No, it can be difficult to handle because I definitely do feel resentment towards my work, but I just kind of push through just because I always have like my end goal in mind of like just getting out of high school and like needing to do this work to graduate and go to college. So like it's just like doing it for the future is kind of what helps me.
Yeah, honestly, I think I'm the same. Like when I think of like doing college apps and like I'm trying to like start doing my essays and like one of the things that really helps me is like when I'm researching a particular school, I look at like their programs and like, I see like, oh, this is what I want to do. And it's like really cool because it's like they have like all of these like courses and classes and it's like it's interesting to think that maybe like, in 6 months if I like continue to like try to do my work, I might be there.
Mhm. Mhm.
Nicole, what you're describing is using kind of excite and delight. You remember the different stress responses? You broached that subject a little bit earlier when I was asking about the 5 responses. This was the stress responses, right? So fight, flight, hand and befriend, rise to the challenge, excite, delight. So this is basically looking at your stressor through a different lens as something that's interesting and delighting because, ooh, I could potentially be going here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they have this really cool program that I could do whatever's with, or they have this amazing, I don't know, gym facility on campus. If I were there, I could use it every day or what, like whatever the thing is that helps you get excited about visualizing yourself there. So this is part of, I don't know if you remember the visualization skill. So this was a way to imagine yourself in the place or imagine yourself doing the thing. And that gives you, positive feedback and more incentive, right? It makes your why bigger than your butt. And it helps you find the spoonful of sugar in the job that has to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Ruhi, the thing that you described is something that everybody, like a lot of adults do, that whole I just have to do it, just knuckle down, push through it, right? And it works for a while, especially it's really important when you're sprinting. You just have to do it. But when you're marathoning, like I know people in their careers that burn out over time because that's their only response is I just have to do it. I just have to do it. I just have to do it. And after a while, there's no more energy or motivation. They're like, look up and they go, why am I doing this? Why do I just have to do it? I don't want to do it anymore. And then they quit. And they try and grass is greener over there and they try and do that over there. But then same thing happens. I have to do this. Every job has stuff that you just have to do. And maybe some jobs are better. I'm not saying that all jobs are equal, but every task, every role, every, responsibility has those components of it that you like and other ones that you don't like that you have to push through. If that's the only response that you have though, that's a way of burning out in the future as an adult.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like I got really burnt out after my junior year, and I feel like I can still feel the effects of that burnout. And I feel like senioritis is like already started, even though it's just first semester. And yeah, it's been hard because like, even though I keep saying like I just have to do it, like it's not working as well because I've already experienced like that burnout.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Speaking of burnout and senioritis, I just want to tell you this one story. Okay. I realize we're kind of running out of time here. Does anybody have to run off to anything at noon? No. Okay. I'll try not to go over too much, but this is a really important story. You may remember that I told you my son graduated last year. He was a senior and he got a huge case of senioritis. He totally burned out. I mean, he was busting his butt with APs and, like hardcore athletics and really burning the candle at both ends. Okay. And, despite what I tell him, I'm his mother, so he's going to do his thing. That's just the way it is. I'm resigned to that. But anyway, he pushed through the first half of senior year with sports in the fall season and all the college applications, essays, the rest of his AP classes and stuff like that through first semester. Come to second semester, applications are in, he gets accepted, and then it's just like all the energy goes out. Don't want to go to class. If I get to class, it's, late, right? So we started getting notices from the school about, absences and late notices that could potentially lead to detention or other things, like not being able to walk at graduation or, whatever. So we had a conversation about this. What are the drivers now for you, right? You got into college. Do the APs matter still? Like, can you get units? Will this college that you want to go to, that you've accepted, will they accept the APs? Turns out no. Right? Like one of them, but the other ones not so much. They won't accept the units. So the purpose of taking the AP was, one, to get into the college to begin with, and two, to get the units to not have to take the class in college, right? But if the college doesn't recognize the units, then now what's the point of the AP? Is it just finish strong and that kind of thing? Or is there something else you can learn? So we had a conversation about, well, if the APs don't matter anymore, and you've already gone to college and you're not on probation, I mean, obviously you don't want to flunk out in senior year, so you got to maintain some level of academic caliber, right? But it doesn't have to be as hard as you were going, like, junior year and maybe first semester. What would be your important focus now that you're here? What are you thinking about? And for him, it was my friends, because in a few months, I'm not going to see them. Mm-hmm. And our time spent together is going to be really minimal. Mm-hmm. Okay, I get it. So part of your time is going to be focused on your friends, but it can't be all of the time. What else can you learn? What else would you be doing? And he said, get a job. I would be working if I didn't have to go to school right now, to save money for fun things that I want to do, or for just, parts of college, whatever. And also, from my perspective, the experience of working and all that was involved in working, not just like work ethic and responsibility and, how world works, how business works, stuff like that, but just like he was interested in data and doing like data science and statistics. So the company that he went to work for uses data all the time. And he just, in passing, even what he was doing was like stocking, right? Like putting items on the shelf, or like, it was a really manual kind of job, but he could see in the system what they were doing with data. How many of this product went through the shop in a week? And, what do they need to do to move this other product? Or what's something that draws people in and then other things can sell, or just all of the information that they were using. It became like, oh, now I see what companies do with information. And that experience in and of itself was something that he would never get in class. And then he had opportunities with selling and opportunities with, coming to work on time, those kind of things. Just so many different opportunities that came out of actual day-to-day working, where he wouldn't get those in school. And so for me, moving away from the academic side of things and being, really focused on pushing for A's in classes became less important than having real life work experience and splitting your energy between, some school but also some real world. Mm-hmm. Having that conversation with yourself and maybe your parents about, what should I be focusing on now? Because I pushed through that period where I really had to focus, but now I'm burnout and I don't have the energy to continue to do this thing anymore. Is there something else that's a priority that can still work towards, that I feel like is new, it's interesting, I can have the energy to spend on it, it actually brings me some additional value? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because like I feel like a lot of people, it's kind of, especially like first semester, it's like more of a focus, like everything you do is kind of more of a focus, like how do I have this last push to get into college or whatever. And I think like redefining your goals, because like I feel like for so long, like for most of the people in our school, it's like getting into college or like doing well, but like being able to redefine your goals to use, like to actually utilize those 6 months that you have before you go to college can be like really helpful. And like whether that be from like a part-time job, or like finding like putting more time in classes that might like be more related to your major or things like that. I think it's important.
Yeah. Yeah, we have to reinvent ourselves as adults as well, right? We continually have to do that. We can't expect to get into one job, do the same thing for the rest of our lives. It doesn't happen. We have to revisit. Things happen. We get burnout. What can we change? How can we reinvigorate ourselves? Find a new reason for doing what we're doing. Yeah. Reprioritize. Ruhi, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think it's important to spend that next 6 months trying to just find opportunities and like figure out what your other passions are. Because the past 3 years we've been like so fixated on the same thing, and now that it's like over, you can kind of like explore different paths that maybe we just didn't have the time to do when we were in high school.
Thinking about that as an interesting opportunity after you get finished with your college apps can help you get through the next chunk of time where you're feeling that burnout and you like, you know, all the original reasons have kind of gone away and now you have to just finish strong and you're like, I don't want to do it. So anyway, that's a way to deal with the emotions, is to look at what are your values and your priorities. How do I restructure what I'm doing to make it coincide and keep my why bigger than my butt?
Yeah, so I think continuing is like, if you're on the edge of burnout, what should you do? And I think there's some indicators like that we mentioned earlier, like crying, being really angry, being very panicky, or feeling a lot of emotional overwhelmingness. And moving into like what should you do? One of the first things is distress tolerance skills, and they're like survival skills that you have when you're feeling when you're like, they're like your crisis survival skills.
And one of the crisis survival skills that we like to use in the curriculum is wave surfing, which is the idea that it takes 90 seconds to dissipate the current emotion that you're feeling. So for example, if you're feeling really anxious or angry, you kind of wait for like 90 seconds, feel the emotion and let it go. And then you don't keep thinking about it. Otherwise, it's going to take you another 90 seconds to get over it. The idea is you take the 90 seconds and then you let the emotion go.
Nice.
I feel like another skill, and this is something that I'm like really trying to work on, is radical acceptance. And it's basically just like trying not to let your pain turn into suffering. So like rather than just focusing on like why you keep having to do this and like constantly being upset about it, you just kind of accept the fact that like, yes, it's challenging and yes, it might suck, but you might as well just like focus on doing it anyways because you can't control it. And so I feel like that's something that I need to work on because I'm like always fighting what I can't control. And I'm like, why do I have to do this assignment? Why do I have to turn this in? Like, why do I have to go to school? And it's like, I just have to do it because like I can't control it.
Yeah, for sure. Let me just interject here. Wave surfing and radical acceptance, they go hand in hand, obviously, right? Because during that time period of the wave surfing, you're kind of having to focus on radical acceptance. And that's hard to do. We all said that already, you know, just do it is hard. It takes willpower. So how do you do something else that can distract you and also make the situation better?
Yeah, I think another like as we were saying, like a distress tolerance skill would be TIP. So TIP stands for temperature intensive exercise, progressive muscle relaxation, and pace breathing. And it's something that it's intended to use when you're like in crisis and really overwhelmed with intense and painful emotions. And it's kind of used to help ground you and decrease the intensity of the distress so you can like more tolerate that moment and reduce your suffering. So the first one is temperature, which is kind of like you're engaging your mammalian dive reflex. For example, like you put an ice pack, or like you put your head in a really cold icy water, and that is like one method to like use TIP. And then another is intense exercise. So like you like run around really fast, or you dance, or you do jumping jacks, and you kind of use the energy from fight and flight to be in a more manageable state.
Right. So you've got all those hormones that got released, you know, in the distress. And now, and they're telling you, here are the hormones and here's the energy for running away or fighting. And then you're supposed to sit quietly and do something. It's hard, right? So we need to use up that energy. And that's in part what the intense exercise is about.
Moving on from there, the third part of TIP is paced breathing. So if you're like hiking and you have to hike up like this a long mountain and you're like out of breath already, and it's like a mile more, and you're just like dreading it, you have to kind of change your way of breathing to adapt to this new challenge. So you may take long breaths and you may like slow your breathing so your heart rate also slows and your muscle tension reduces. And this engages your parasympathetic nervous system and the rest/digest response, which just calms you down and gets you ready for a challenge.
Right. So let me just clarify that point. If you're climbing the mountain, you actually need your heart rate to go a little faster. But if you are in the moment where you're experiencing that kind of panicky fight, flight, I need to fight or run away, but actually it's like you're in a test or you're in class or you're, I don't know, you're at home and it's not really appropriate to the setting, then that's when you want to do the reverse, which is to engage your parasympathetic and calm everything down. Yeah.
And then the last part of tip would be progressive muscle relaxation, which is just noticing and releasing like the tension buildup in your body. I feel like when I'm super anxious, I get like my body gets so tense and I don't even like realize how tense it is, to the point like until when I'm like sleeping and I'm like finally relaxing and I'm like, oh wow, my body was like so tense throughout the entire day. So progressive muscle relaxation basically just like teaches you to tense your muscles and then relax them, and you'll kind of like notice how your muscles like relax when you feel it. And it like helps you like relax your body and then get rid of like that built up tension.
Yeah. So it also, all four of these individual parts of tip, these individual skills, temperature, intense exercise, pace breathing, and progressive muscle relaxation, they all four engage the parasympathetic nervous system in some way. So you're actually using your own nervous system to calm yourself down, right? You're turning the switch on, as opposed to, I mean, it's not magic is what I guess I'm trying to say. We all have a parasympathetic nervous system, so we can all use this skill effectively. Yeah. And that last one of progressive muscle relaxation is also about how do I turn on the switch of parasympathetic nervous system, and that's by releasing that muscle tension, and then that helps us calm everything else down. Great.
Moving into our last segment, which is about thoughts, and it's how do we manage our thoughts and shift our mindset to manage burnout, and like how do our thoughts contribute to burnout? So how do like self-limiting beliefs contribute to burnout? And I think a big thing is that we have to be able to notice them in order to catch it and then check it and then eventually change it.
Yeah, so an example of one of the self-limiting beliefs is black or white or all or nothing thinking, which kind of arises the question of how do I start breaking larger tasks into smaller ones when they all feel of equal importance, which brings me to another question of are they really all important? So how our thoughts play into this is that when you're on the edge of burnout or at burnout, and we start thinking that all of our tasks are really important and we have to allot this amount of time to all of these tasks to make them all perfect, but we don't prioritize or we don't realize that some tasks are more important than other tasks. So that's what needs to be changed. We need to know that, like, for example, if you have homework due the next day or a project due in a month, you may think the project might be more important because it's bigger, but if it were me, I would prioritize my homework since it's due the next day. So it's just kind of that allotment of what's more important.
And I think like part of the reason why we have trouble like challenging the idea of everything isn't of equal importance is because we're like kind of taught that more is better. Like the more you take on, the more successful you'll be. And so we think that we have to like do everything that's on our plate and treat it of equal importance to like feel successful. Because I think it's like ingrained in our mind that like burnout is like kind of equated with success. And so we think that we have to burn ourselves out in order to be successful. When in reality, like you can be successful and like still take care of yourself without getting burnt out.
So let me ask you a question. If I think that everything, if I know that my homework is due, right, sooner than the big project, but I have a lot of homework every day, and if I spend all my time every day working on the homework that's due the next day, and I don't have any time left for my big project, how do I manage that? What is it that I could do differently?
Well, I think you have to like keep in mind, you can't like forget about the project, obviously. You have to keep that in the back of your mind. Like if it were me, I would have like read over what the project is and like while I'm going through all my like daily things, I would be like sort of planning it out in my head, like how I want to do each step of my project. So eventually, like there's always going to be homework, and you are going to have to allot time once you like get closer to the project deadline to work on the project. But I would start like future planning before I
Yeah.
like actually started.
Any thoughts from anybody else? How to manage that stuff?
Yeah, I agree. Like it's kind of you start breaking apart the project as you go on. And I think sometimes it's because you have so much homework to do and maybe they're only worth like less points and you have it every single day. It might be more beneficial to prioritize like doing a project some days because you have the homework every single day. So it's not as big.
Or could you do the homework, but do it at like 70% instead of 100%? Right? Instead of like spending hours on your everyday homework, just get it done, do it good enough, and then leave yourself time to work on the project, right? Instead of spending so long on the homework that we now don't have project time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's part of the black and white thinking, that we think that we have to do our homework at 110% and the project at 110%, but actually, the homework is just muscle memory. It's practice. Let's do it again, do it again, do it again. And eventually overdoing it again, we're going to get it. But it doesn't have to be perfect and 100% every single time. It's just get it done. Okay.
I think another self-limiting belief is fortune telling. So it kind of falls into two categories, like either like catastrophizing the situation. So it's an example might be a fear of failing. What if like this completely goes wrong and I completely fail, or like another example is like, what if I just, don't get into any college, or like thinking of the worst possible outcome. And then I think another category of fortune telling is kind of mind reading. So you kind of just make assumptions of what people are thinking. So ideas like they all hate me, or they're doing it on purpose, or like they're working against me.
So another self-limiting belief is shitting on ourselves. It's like having these really high expectations of ourselves or really high expectations of someone else. So kind of like asking, oh, I should have done this. Why didn't I do this? They should have done this. Why didn't they do this? So it's kind of like after you've done something and then you kind of reflect on it and you're reflecting on it in like a negative way, like I could have done this so much better, but why didn't I? So it's kind of like bringing back this negative mindset.
Yeah, exactly. So part of shoulding is disqualifying your own positives and focusing only on your negatives, or like in a black and white sort of way. This falls under the black and white bucket, and also kind of the catastrophizing bucket. That first thing we do is we disqualify our positives. I don't do anything right. Then we negative mental filter. I do all this stuff wrong, and then I should be better. I should do it this way. All the shoulds that Sonia just mentioned. Make sense? So what are some things that we can actually do to manage those thoughts and beliefs that are undermining us? I mean, we talk a lot about, I'm sure at school, you've heard about growth mindset versus fixed mindset. You should have a growth mindset, but how do we do that? How do we recognize when our thoughts are limiting ourselves and change them?
I think one thing to do is journaling or writing. It's like a good way to write what you're feeling, and I think it helps you be able to catch the thoughts that you have. And then and then you can like catch it, check it, change it. Then you can start noticing these thoughts, and you can kind of classify them to what kind of self-limiting beliefs that you have, and then work to better change them.
I agree. I think another way to manage your thoughts is by going on walks. So trying to like get out of your head. So like going on walks or going for a run like releases endorphins. So you feel this more like happy, sort of positive attitude, which helps to clear your mind, sort out your thoughts, and think clearly about what's important to you.
Yeah, it's amazing how all those things are integrated. They're combined, right? Our bodies and the state of our body and our brain chemistry affects the way we think and the way we feel. So if we can change up, so if we notice, for starters, that we're thinking in a funny way or a non-helpful way, and it's giving us all these emotions, because that's how we notice it, then we can work on changing our body and supporting our brain chemistry so that we can then change our thoughts. right? So how do we change our thoughts? What is that process of change?
Yeah, it's important to catch it, check it, change it, to break like that cycle of just depressing and anxious thoughts. So like first catch it and see when you might be having these negative thoughts. So like identify when you're feeling anxious and like check your thoughts to see what you're thinking, and then check it. So like check the facts, see if it's like realistic, or if it's, you're just interpreting it in like a different way because of how you're feeling. And then finally change it. Like try substituting more realistic thoughts and like identifying the pros and cons.
Right. I want to give you a baby step on that, because catch it, check it, change it, even though it's really obvious, it's hard, right? It's hard when we're in the process and we're caught up in those emotions and we go, but this is the way I feel, right? And I'm still going to continue this way. Well, the issue is it helping us? What are the pros and cons of continuing in that behavior? And do I really want to continue to go down that route, even though right now I'm caught up in the emotions and the emotions kind of feel self-righteous or justifying or something, right? That's the tricky part, is getting past the emotions that we're feeling in order to do the things that we know we need to do. And those emotions are sometimes judgy emotions, right? I should be better. Everybody else is doing it, blah, blah. I'm going to fail if I don't, worry, all that. And we've developed these habits in our brain. Even emotions are habits. Thoughts, emotions, actions, they're all brain paths that we have, that we build up the neurons and they become automatic responses. And we have to rewire our brain by changing the way we think, catching when we're doing something that's undermining us, and then like constantly change. And then those patterns become the new wiring. And as we build them up, they become our new habits. That's actually how it works. And you guys, you're in your teens now, you've had 10 some odd years of thinking in patterns that might be unhelpful. So it's going to take some time to think in patterns that are going to be more helpful. Imagine you were like 40, 50 years old and you were just discovering this and you're trying to change those decades long habits of thinking in certain ways. It does take time. And, we've discussed all these skills around helping our bodies, helping our emotions, helping our thoughts, and helping the stuff that we do, the work, the actions, to try and support our intentional shift in a different direction.
So we've come to the end of our podcast and we've covered a lot of material so far, and we would just want to give some of our final thoughts. First one is that there's no specific age to have a burnout. Anyone and everyone can get a burnout at any age, whether it be as a kid, a middle, high schooler, college, or even as an adult. And we want to let you guys know that life is overwhelming and there's a lot of stressing things that will happen, but that's part of life. And as a result, burnout will probably happen. It's probably inevitable. And it will seem that like life's really out of control. But the point of our podcast is to say that even though there are a lot of things that are out of our control, there are still a lot of things that are in our control and a lot of things that we can do to improve our situation. So as we mentioned before, the model for managing burnout that we introduced in the beginning of this podcast can help us diagnose where we need more support, whether it's in our thoughts, emotions, body, or actions.
Yeah, so we talked about what can we do. So one of the first things is addressing our thoughts that we have. So whether we like glorify burnout or we think that it's a good thing. We also talked about addressing our bodies. So addressing lack of sleep and how we need it for energy and mental performance and to still do well. Then we talked about how we can use a resilience battery recharge to help prevent burnout, and addressing procrastination by warming up our bodies and brains to work. And then we also address perfectionism. So by changing the way we think and about how we think and about the work we need to do. And finally, we also talked about how if you're feeling too emotional or too distressed to think clearly, the first thing that we can do is to use the crisis survival skills to get back into a calmer state and then make more effective decisions from there.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. We hope you were able to take away an idea or action that you can start using to improve your mental wellness.
If you want to hear more about what EP is doing to support teen mental health, check out our Instagram at EP Mental Health. And if you want to learn more about the solutions we talked about, make sure to check out the HAERT program website. See you next time.
Bye.